one Jake Paul who was in a press conference with Nate Diaz. Then the reporter's like, what they made a comment about like, yeah, since you'll never be a Hall of Fame boxer. And then he was like, wait, who are you to say I'll never be a Hall of Fame boxer? And then he basically went on to talk about everything he did for the sport. So Jake Paul just laid out like, hey, celebrity boxing, kind of created my own lane in boxing. This is a new part of the sport. I think I will deserve some recognition for that. I've got a lot of people paid. What are your overall thoughts on his ambitions to make the Hall of Fame?
Well, it's definitely ambitious. What I will say about Jake Paul is he's definitely impacted the sport on a pretty great level. Interested to see how it carries on and how it kind of flows through the market in the coming years. But his career isn't over, and he's already made hundreds of millions of dollars from this boxing. And I think he started in 2018, 2019? He's been in the mix for like 5 years now, I think. Just about.
Yeah, 4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah, so, and he's pivoted from a Disney star over into one of the biggest boxers in the world. Now, you could argue his competition to this point, how it's been, but he is building up the ranks. It looks like his competition's getting better each time. So I think within the next 10 years, if he can actually get some really, really solid competition, I think he can make the Hall of Fame. It's not impossible. I mean, his impact on the sport can't be understated at this point.
Yeah, and then it would also be one of those situations where it's like, are we creating like a new path in the boxing Hall of Fame? Because like for me, it's just like, I feel like it'd be something where you'd have to have like almost like this like YouTube celebrity boxing Hall of Fame and created it differently, because Jake Paul has made the argument before. He's like, well, look at all of these boxers like competitions. They're just fighting like no-name guys in a gym. Like if I beat someone like that, no one would care. So I'm fighting like Ben Askren, a wrestler in UFC. He wasn't even like a stand-up guy in UFC. And then he rolls out Tyron Woodley twice out of retirement, beats Anderson Silva when he's 43 years old. And then Nate Diaz, he couldn't even finish Nate Diaz. And it's like, he's someone who's 39 years old, knocked him down once, but wasn't able to knock the guy out, which I think if you want to be in the Hall of Fame and you want to be considered a legitimate boxer, you can't go out there against someone like Tommy Fury, who's by no means one of the best boxers in the world. He's not even top 5. When you ask anyone about their list, looks like a much more fluent boxer, was able to have much better combinations than Jake Paul. Jake Paul kind of hung around, but you can tell Tommy was the better boxer. Where Jake, it looks like he has some power, but it definitely faded in that fight versus Nate Diaz. So I think with him, it's like, yeah, but it would kind of have to be like boxing. It depends on how the Hall of Fame sees him, because if they see him as a net positive for the sport, I could see them making an exception. But at the same time, they could be like, this is actually bad for the sport, because now the people who are actually good at boxing, who have been boxing since they were 14, 15 years old, aren't getting the recognition they deserve, who are better boxers and fighters. And then people don't even talk about Canelo Alvarez anymore or Triple G. And then they're talking about Jake Paul, he's a really good boxer, but he's not to the level as the top 10 pros in the world or the top 15. And if he fought him tomorrow, he probably wouldn't win. And it's like, he started boxing late, so it's commendable that he's come this far and is able to go toe to toe with UFC fighters. But as soon as he fought a real boxer, it's like he hung in there. Yeah, but that's the difference between someone who's been boxing since they're 16 and is not even like a ranked fighter in the top 5 versus someone who picked up boxing, has all the money to pay for trainers and top talent. He's able to get up to a point and he has the power for it, but you can't struggle against someone like Nate Diaz, who's 39 years old, not a boxer.
Yeah, I think that him starting as late as he did and being as good as he's been to this point makes me optimistic, because this is a guy, again, who hasn't had his career fully written out yet. It's kind of like if I'll use Justin Herbert as an example, right? If Justin Herbert would have retired today, definitely not a Hall of Famer. He's been great, but he's not a Hall of Famer because he hasn't accomplished enough and he hasn't proven himself yet. Jake Paul's kind of similar, where I think he's talented enough that he can fight these boxers to like get his resume to be accomplished, but he hasn't had it yet because he's still 4 or 5 years into this whole kickboxing phase. And so if he can get that, if he can legitimize himself, which I think is what he's facing now, I think he knows that he can't keep fighting YouTubers. He can't keep fighting the Tyron Woodleys of the world. He needs to fight real guys. And that's what the last 2 fights have been. He didn't beat Tommy Fury, but it was a good fight. He beat Nate Diaz. If he can get more players that are, you know, his age,
Yeah,
that's what he needs to do now.
Citizens.
Yeah, let's fight some guys who are like currently great, you know. Then he'll legitimize himself. But I think he's got like 10 more years to like fully write his resume and like legitimize himself. And then we'll even see the effects to this point. I think 10 years from now, if we're talking 2033, Jake Paul's Hall of Fame argument will be a lot more legitimate than now.
Yeah. Yeah, I just need to see him like go toe to toe and actually beat a boxer, because for me it's like hard to see him not be able to knock out Nate Diaz and not be able to like dominate him in a round like that where it's kind of ugly and he's not having like these really good combinations. It's still a lot of hugging in the middle of the ring. But for me, it's not really like a Justin Herbert situation. It's more like if Andrew Scholes was like, yeah, this comedy stuff is cool. I'm going to pay like the best trainers, though. I'm going to get really good at basketball. And I'm going to call out the best volleyball players because while they're not basketball players, they can jump really high. They can probably dunk and they can probably block my shot. But I'm going to play like one-on-one with some of the best volleyball players in the world. It's like, okay, like UFC is cool, but they're still not trained orthodox boxers. And Tommy Fury is also, Jake Paul's 26, Tommy Fury was 23. So it's like someone who's 3 years younger than him. But I think what makes the most sense for him is just like to argue with the Hall of Fame, like, hey, I was able to help a lot of kids get into boxing. I did a lot for the sport and the community where I have my Golden Gloves program, where I help a lot of poor kids like that aren't able to box and maybe don't have the best home situation, which is really awesome that he does that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just has to go to, he's stuck in the dilemma where if he fights someone who's like in the bottom 20s of boxing just to work his way up the ranks, it's not going to draw as much money and it's not going to be as interesting. And he would really have to like hone in on his career and then work his way up the ranks of boxing. And then, but at the same time, it's like he also wants to make money from it. Whereas he'd probably want to fight someone like Conor McGregor or someone like Andrew Tate that would pull a lot of funds. But like if he fights Andrew Tate and Andrew Tate like beats him and like beats him pretty badly, that would be pretty bad because Andrew Tate's just a kickboxer. And if Andrew Tate fought like someone like Canelo Alvarez, he would probably lose pretty fast.
Yeah, I think that what will ultimately get him into the Hall of Fame, if he were to get elected, is going to be his legacy and kind of his impact on the game. Kind of similar to someone like a Michael Vick, right? Michael Vick, Hall of Fame resume, doesn't really stand out, doesn't really have the numbers for it, doesn't necessarily have, you know, didn't really make it far. I mean, he made it to the NFC title game once against the Eagles. Eagles beat them. But he's like the pioneer of the running quarterback. Granted, you know, we had the Steve Youngs that can move a little bit. You had the, you know, the Randall Cunninghams and these other guys, but he was like the first like primeval running quarterback. First guy to rush for 1,000 yards, 10 years ahead of his time. Okay. I think if Michael Vick was a Hall of Famer, which I don't know if he ever will be just because of his past, but definitely deserving because of the fact of his impact on the game. You could argue at least, yeah, for the Hall of Fame. And that's where I think Jake Paul would fit in. I don't think it's his resume that'll get him in. I think it'd be his legacy or his impact on the sport that would affect it.